car now is really a work of art.
It's amazing, you know, to be part of the Red Bull family. The level of engineering inside this team is very impressive.
They are often the fastest team when it comes to pit stops.
We want to fight for the championship.
That's typical Max. He'll fight every inch.
I just can't wait to get started.
Oh, guys, what an amazing race. Oh, thank you so much. Also, everyone, back at the factory, this is what you get when, you keep pushing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Eau Rouge podcast with Chris and James, of course. Chris always by my side every single time. And today we're looking at the RB16B Red Bull launch. Some huge changes to the live... Oh, no, wait, hang on. It's the same as every year, Chris, as it always is with Red Bull.
Well, there's never anything new, but I suppose when your car is just a rolling billboard, there is some value in consistency. And it has to be said, it's not the worst looking car on the grid. There's a lot worse team colours that could stay the same. And if anything, every year it becomes just a little bit less busy and therefore slightly better every time.
So it's a case of refinement for their livery to get the perfect one rather than changing to shock or to make it a bit more outstanding then. Is that what you would say?
I think so. I think it's keeping it simple, but you look at it, you see the Red Bull charging forwards, you see that shade of dark blue with the yellow, and immediately you know it's a Red Bull. There's no conflict between Red Bull and Toro Rosso anymore, so there's no getting them confused. You see it, you know what it is, you know to expect good things from the driver inside.
And that is branding, I suppose. That is how you market things. It's a shame because there have been some excellent kind of one-off liveries, haven't they, that Red Bull have done for testing and stuff like that. And some of those have looked really good. And I just have that desire to see them in a race. I know I agree. The Red Bull car, it does look pretty. I like it. I think that the design works really well. But I just want to see those really special different ones actually involved in a race one day.
I would love to see the camo bull taken on as their full season paint job because it's just such a nice looking car. It just looks really cool, and it's a bit different. One of the nice things about these one-off paint jobs they give cars at testing is it really makes them stand out from the field. And I know that as BAR found out, you can't constantly keep changing the appearance of the car throughout the season, but it was a shame, really. There's some really good ideas that never get the chance to shine that they absolutely deserve.
You feel there is a case of sometimes there are restrictions. There's a standardization that all of these teams have to kind of follow in order to get that car onto the grid, like the livery onto the grid. But just, a little bit of a different twist to the Red Bull would one day, I think, provide quite a shock. But our listeners or viewers might have noticed we're talking a lot about the livery because, well, we had a look at the car and it's certainly from the outside looks like it is the least changed of the cut from last year compared to the rest of the unveilings that we've seen so far. But the further you dig into it, the further you have a look, there are some subtle differences, which you never know could have a big impact. Chris, is there anything that you noticed that you could talk us through?
So Red Bull, I always think of the team that manage the most creative pieces of innovation every season. They normally start off quite a long way behind and catch up over the year because they come up with really clever ways to improve their existing design. Now, the RBR16B has obviously some small aero tweaks. There's a lot of shaping to help move the air around the body in the places they want it to go. But the real work has occurred at the very front of the nose. If you look at the air vent at the very front of the nose, you'll see now instead of one long tube, it's two thin ones. Now, we're not yet sure exactly where those air ducts go, But if you do take a look at the back of the car, you can see that there's been quite a lot of repackaging done at the end as well. And I would be willing to bet that the airflow somehow feeds out the back of the car and helps to power the diffusers to increase downforce in the setup. They've still got the very high rake angle from last year. That was a big talking point. Was that making the car impossible to drive for new drivers? Was it making it too unstable? But it's pretty obvious from testing photos that they've kept that dramatic nose down, tail in the air design. The head down, arse up concept is alive and well in Adrian Newey's drawing board. And they've worked to try and reinforce that idea. So I think that we're going to see internal changes. There were some small changes to the floor around the rear of the car as well, designed to get the most out of the unusual angle, but also attempt to stabilize it so the drivers can have a little more control. I think last year, while Albon visibly really struggled with how the car operated, the high number of crashes from Verstappen may be attributable to some degree to the instability of the car. And I imagine Red Bull themselves know the answer to that question. And this could well be an attempt to resolve that instability to mount a more reliable and more serious title challenge.
But those changes that you mentioned and that we were just talking about there, how are they actually going to really impact the quality of the car this season? Because I've heard a lot of talk from this, unveiling, both from Formula One, the official Formula One account, but also from Red Bull, that this is their title challenger. This isn't just we're consolidating second, preparing for next year. This is what's going to take the competition, the fight to Mercedes. And I can't really see that happening. Can you?
No, I think like we discussed with Ferrari on the Alfa Romeo launch yesterday, I think you have to at least go through the motions of saying, this is it, guys. This is really the car. This year is going to be our year. I wouldn't be surprised if Verstappen could sneak second in the Drivers' Championship, and with Perez providing a reliable second driver, because remember, he came fourth last year in that Racing Point, having the best season of his career by some margin. Is it a title challenger? As I've said before, I think the reason they caught up so close at the end of last year is because Mercedes knew they'd done enough and just stopped developing the car. But I'd like to be wrong. I'd like to see a real title fight between the Mercedes and both of the Red Bulls. But unless this nose duct repackaging of the air coming out the back does something really dramatic, I'm unconvinced that 2021 is going to be the season in which we see Red Bull return to the front of the pack.
I suppose a big part of this argument as well is how will the Honda engine perform this year as well? Because in the past, I mean, you could make an argument for the fact that last year Verstappen maybe deserved his second place, but deserved a second place in the standings. I think he finished third in the end, 9 points behind Valtteri Bottas. Now, if the Honda engine had been more reliable, if it had just survived that one extra race, he might have actually ended up getting into second. So he had 2 retirements last year, I think, that were down to the engines. 3 that you mentioned were collisions, whether or not they were his fault is up for debate, I suppose. So if you look at the package that Honda have with Red Bull, if there is a significant improvement in reliability, is that going to close the gap a little bit more?
You would think so. Looking at the results from last season, only once of Verstappen's finishes did he not finish on the podium. He was pretty consistently second. And if that Honda could have held up where it failed him at points, he would certainly have got second. He'd have cleared 250 points, and we'd have at least seen him a little closer to Hamilton. Now, I think Hamilton is just too imperious there can be little argument, I think, that he wiped the floor last year, and I suspect little argument that he's going to wipe the floor again this year. But increased reliability and what you'd hope is slightly more mature driving from Verstappen should see him get above Bottas, which is going to force Mercedes to react. But as nobody's really put them under solid pressure for the last few years, that could be a potential weak spot. We saw how quickly they went to pieces in Sakir last year. So is the combination of Mercedes and pressure something that could yield an unexpected title result?
Well, I suppose as well, we are expecting Sergio Perez to be finishing much higher up than Albon did last season, and therefore collecting far more points for Red Bull. So in theory as well, the constructor standings would be somewhat, there would be a less of a gap between those top two teams. But let's talk about the drivers then. So Sergio Perez has I'll do the editing thing. There we go. Start that again. Let's talk about the drivers then. So Sergio Perez, new to the team. It's before we actually get into talking about how we think he's going to do this season. For me, and I think for you as well, Chris, it's so good to see that he got a seat this year after all the uncertainty of last year, when it really looked like he wasn't going to be in the sport. And this was a driver that many people consider to be good enough to be in a car like Red Bull. It's so good to see him back on the grid.
Yes, I think it was a victory for a good, solid driver. He brings plenty of backing, which certainly doesn't help, although I don't think matters to Red Bull. But in an age when drivers are just getting younger and younger and younger, and teams are prepping drivers in F3 and F2 to step up as quickly as possible, it's nice to see someone who's had a successful career really prove themselves over the year, turn that into a step up to a shot at genuine success.
And I think it's a testament to him as well, because there was that one season that he had at McLaren where, you know, it was seen as a step forward for him when he moved there. And then he was there for, I think it was one season, wasn't it? And then was kind of punted back, it seemed, and was kind of told, no, you're not good enough. And it was a shame, because actually that McLaren car was an absolute dog, and it really wasn't his. I think personally, some of the blame that was laid upon him was a bit harsh. And he took that step back and has worked his way back up to now being highly regarded on the grid, and is deserving of his chance in the Red Bull.
Yes, and beyond his on-track performance, he's the man single-handedly responsible for saving everybody at Racing Point from going out of business when he introduced legal action, resulting in the team being turned over to Lawrence Stroll, which mercifully also saved us from either Rich Energy or Mazepin Senior from purchasing the team, which I think is also a real service to F1. It's clearly put the team into fantastic hands. It's exciting to sit here and question what's going to happen with Aston Martin next season. And a huge part of the reason we can do that is because of Sergio Perez.
I think it is important to mention as well, Chris, that maybe our viewers don't know this yet, or maybe they do, having seen our little video that we sent through to for the Aston Martin launch on Twitter, that we both live in Mexico City at the moment. We're recording this podcast from there, and that's partly the reason why maybe our podcasts go up a bit later than we would like, because of the time difference. But when I went to the Mexican Grand Prix in 2019, and Perez fever is just a sight to behold. It was absolutely incredible. Not even just the fact that they've got a Mexican driver on the grid, but also the fact that Formula One is back. It is a very popular sport, and when it comes to the city, when they have that race weekend, everything is just all Formula One centered, and it's a massive party. It's so much fun. And so for us as well, I think there's that little bit of extra I don't know what it is, that extra spice that Perez is now in a car where he could potentially win more than one race in a year.
Yes, yeah, he could do genuinely well. And the Mexicans love Mexico. If you've watched Perez's helmet release, where he sits and talks about how proud he is, and he's positioned the flag so that it can be seen best by the onboard cameras. And every time you're riding on board with Checo Perez, you're seeing the Mexican flag. You are seeing the Aztec paintings that he's put on the top to represent the fact he is a Mexican. And I remember the morning he won, I was meant to be busking in the park, and I made up some excuse about why I couldn't go 5 minutes before I was meant to be there so I could stay and take in the history. And the next day, every single piece of media was just a huge face of Checo Perez beaming on the podium. It was fantastic to see. And you can debate, is he the best Mexican driver ever? Does Ricardo Rodriguez deserve that? Who knows? But for Mexicans, it doesn't really matter. They've got a successful driver at the top of the global sport representing Mexico in a fantastic light, which is something really important for Mexicans, given the huge amount of negative press the country unfairly receives and the lazy stereotypes that people sometimes fall into when portraying the country. So to see Perez there being a representative of Mexico is so big for the country, it's difficult to describe.
You can see his face or his cardboard cutout in many places around the city whenever you're traveling. And I love it because some of them are about 7 or 8 years old when he's in his Force India or his Sauber overalls. But yeah, he is a bit of a hero here.
Companies are queuing up to sponsor him, which I think says a lot. You look at how many personal sponsors Perez takes to every team, and it's because every company in Mexico wants to be seen with him, and that's just really nice.
So before we move on to his teammate, I do want to talk just a little bit about what we expect to see from Perez this year and maybe in the future as well, because I think a big question is how long is he going to be with Red Bull? He's only signed a 1-year contract. And is him getting another season at Red Bull dependent on his performance, or is this simply just a stopgap for Red Bull? Because I do fear that might be the case.
I think that Perez is 31 years old. He's not the youngest driver on the grid. That maturity has helped him get the most out of a race-winning car that he somehow found himself in last season. He's only got a year at Red Bull to show he can perform. We've seen with Gasly, we've seen with Albon, you only have a very short time to prove yourself. And if you can't prove yourself, you're out. Now that Red Bull are beginning to dip their toes outside of their junior team talent pool, you could easily see them trying to tempt someone like George Russell into their car. So he's got to do it now. And is he the long-term future of the team? No, he isn't. Could he spend the rest of his career at the team if he continues to perform? Absolutely. And can he perform? Yes. I think it's important to note that he is the most experienced driver to step into a Red Bull car since Mark Webber, certainly, who managed several years until he decided to leave. Perez has years. 2011 was his first season in Formula One. So he's been there 10 years. He's bringing 10 years of racecraft and qualifying experience and knowledge of the tracks, which are things that young prospects like Tsunoda can't bring yet because they don't possess with him. So I expect him to do well. For all the pitfalls that befell Gasly and Albon and Kvyat don't really apply to Perez. He's a special case. It's no guarantee of success. This could be a huge problem for him, but he's being given the chance to show that he can do it, which is more than a lot of perfectly promising drivers get in their entire career.
But does that mean then with that level of experience that he's bringing, can Verstappen actually learn something from him, even though Verstappen this is what, his 7th season now, I think, in Formula One, maybe 6th. Perez, can he learn something from Perez?
Yes. Yeah, he can. I think constantly learning from the people that you're around is the mark of a great driver. It's why going to Mercedes has taken Hamilton from a great driver to probably the best driver of all time. He surrounded himself with people he could learn from. And while that wasn't always his teammate, it was people like Lauda, it was people like Wolff. Bringing in an experienced teammate who can point to his pedigree and say to Max, this is what I do better than you, has its advantages. Will it be a useful year for Verstappen? I don't know, because I'd be interested to see what it would be like if he was on the back foot, because he did lose out that 2016 season to Ricardo, but he was exceptionally new to F1. He was at the start of his 2nd full season, and he's spent the rest of the time destroying anyone they put against him. The real issue for Albon and Gasly wasn't really that they were struggling to perform in the Red Bull. It was that they were getting flayed alive by Verstappen every single weekend without fail, because the man is absolutely merciless. 10 Grand Prix wins in the last 4 full seasons of racing. He was easily the 2nd best driver last season. And there's an argument to be made to say he was the best driver on the field last season, because he had inferior equipment and still managed to finish 2nd almost all of the time. But you're never too old to learn. And the smooth, confident, assured driving style that Perez brings to Red Bull is the missing piece of the Verstappen puzzle. Verstappen is this great banzai young driver, as Hamilton was. But just like Hamilton did in those first few relatively unsuccessful years, that banzai attacking style leads you to crash into the pit lane wall in China. It leads you to go off on the first lap in your Red Bull, despite being assured. It was the Tuscan Grand Prix, wasn't it? He just went off and clipped the corner, and that was that. Learning to eliminate those mistakes is something that Verstappen will have to do, and he's being given the tools to learn how to do that this season.
So does that mean then he's just got to wait 1 more year? He's got to wait 1 more year till the new regulations come in and the new cars. Hamilton, in theory, will retire at the end of this year with his 8th world title, paving the way for Verstappen. Or does Verstappen need that move to Mercedes in order to get that world championship that we all think he probably deserves now?
If it wasn't for the rule change, I'd say he needs the move. It's going to be difficult to tell. If you look how dominant Red Bull were going into the regulation changes in 2014 and how quickly they fell off the pace as a result, you can see that there's no promises that Mercedes will continue, especially with the way the FIA have basically designed Mercedes spoiling rules to try and reduce the downforce and clean up the air behind the car to get the other cars around quicker. So we'll have to see next year. It may be if Mercedes or Aston Martin or Alfa Romeo or Haas suddenly crack the code to developing the perfect 2022 car, that he will have to move to that team, because the F1 is littered with examples of drivers who were the best on the grid but didn't have the best machinery. So there's nothing that promises Verstappen a title just because he's incredibly quick. He needs the machinery. Formula One is a team sport, and he needs the team behind him, which hopefully 2022 offers.
I mean, it's obvious, I think, that Red Bull are just, and have done since he really came into the sport, just thrown everything behind him, haven't they? He is their golden boy. And Ricciardo leaving the team actually paved the way for them to make Verstappen that #1 driver, although I'm sure they would have done it anyway. And they, producing a car, because they know if they don't produce a car good enough to win a world title, Verstappen will leave, because He's going to be world champion. So I suppose there is that level of, Red Bull have to haul themselves up to where they should be. And I think that it's interesting that you mentioned how Perez is that missing piece of the puzzle for him, because I was just looking at his year just gone by, and also in previous years as well. He's still making mistakes. He's certainly not an inexperienced driver. 7 years in Formula One is a long time. The longevity's already there, actually. Obviously, he's still, really young. Still joined the sport when he was in nappies, basically. But should he be making the kind of mistakes that he has been making? He had 2 retirements last year from collisions. One of them was a puncture, and then the other 2, of course, as we've spoken about, were engine failures. But that now having Perez as part of the team, bringing that level of maturity, that level of support that he didn't have with Albon, because obviously Albon was having his own issues, actually maybe could propel him up a little bit further. One question I did want to run by you, and I don't know at all if this is going to have any impact on him whatsoever. Having Zandvoort on the calendar this year, obviously it was on the calendar last year, but we didn't get to race there. Is that a massive boost for him? You see how much he enjoys going to Belgium, but is that a massive boost for him, or is that going to be extra pressure?
I think he enjoys going to Belgium because he gets to go to Spa. It's the perfect track for a driver like Verstappen, who just goes fast. Every driver loves Spa. It's a great place to be. I'm sure the orange sea doesn't hurt him. But the big question is, if there's no crowd, does it matter where you're racing? If the people aren't there waving their Verstappen flags in their orange hats with their huge Dutch tricolour flags, might you just as well be racing in Kyalami or Buenos Aires or anywhere like that when there's no tangible benefit to being there? Of course, if fans can be there, I'm sure it won't hurt him to be able to call on their support and for them to be cheering him on at every turn. And it is impressive that in F1 cars you can still hear the crowd when they're at their loudest. But I think just being in Zandvoort alone doesn't necessarily guarantee success, especially when it's a revamped track that doesn't see a huge amount of open wheel racing. So I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head last time Verstappen has been there, but I would imagine it's not been for the better part of 10 years if he has.
And he's not won at Spa at all since in his career. So it's not actually. You could make an argument that when we had fans in the at the tracks, at the circuits, that maybe it wasn't giving him as much benefit as he would have hoped, or we would have hoped for. But who knows? I think that I think for him, he does tend to thrive on a lot of pressure, which I quite like about him. And I think that maybe the reason I ask is because I think maybe it could be a tipping point for him. Who knows? Just knowing that you've got that home Grand Prix there. So maybe that will spark something more within him.
Verstappen strikes me as the kind of man who doesn't really care what other people think. You see it, okay, you tend to see it when he's done something offensive, like the whole incident where he called a driver something relatively racist this year, and then they said, will he apologize? And he went, no, why would I bother? So does that sort of self-contained self-belief preclude him from soaking up the atmosphere the way that, say, Hamilton needs positive energy in order to succeed? Or do you have a point? Do you think that getting in front of a huge crowd will propel him to 25 points and an extra point for fastest lap?
It's going to be really interesting to see. But let's move on to our predictions then. So just again for everybody, just a reminder, last year, obviously, Red Bull came second with 319 points. They were obviously way off Mercedes still. Mercedes were far ahead, but they were also way ahead of the rest of the pack, and McLaren in third place. So they were very much out on their own in second. Verstappen came third in the in the Drivers' Championship with 214 points, only 9 points behind Bottas, which, as we've discussed, he could probably have taken that second place with an extra finish. And Perez finished an incredible fourth last year in that Racing Point. A long way behind Verstappen on points, but in a Racing Point. So that's important to consider. Where do we think the drivers and the team are going to finish this year?
It's becoming a recurring theme, but maybe second for Verstappen, probably third. I'm maintaining that what Mercedes is about to unleash will be absolute domination to the point of monotony. So I think Verstappen third, Perez fourth. I think Perez fourth either way, but I do tip him to pick up a couple of wins, because it is important to remember that he missed 2 races with COVID-19 last year. So if he'd got them, he would have been closer, certainly, especially as the Racing Point was so quick out of the gates last season. So second, maybe third for Verstappen, solid fourth for Perez, which is still a brilliant result. It's still the result he needs to bring home to preserve his contract and his seat. So a happy ending for Sergio Perez, and probably the same, if not slightly more success for Max Verstappen.
I think it would be absolutely insane to suggest that Red Bull would come anywhere other than second next year. I think they're not going to beat Mercedes, and at the same time, I don't think they're going to finish lower than second. But I think they're going to be closer this year, and so there really is going to be a big battle, I think, for second place in the Drivers' Championship between Verstappen and Bottas this year. And the whole time we've been doing this podcast, I've been going back and forth in my head about where I think Verstappen is going to finish. And I think I've just made up my mind, and I'm going to say I think that Verstappen will finish second in the Drivers' Championship this year by 2 or 3 points to Valtteri Bottas. I think he's going to have that swing. Bottas usually starts his season pretty well, but then tends to make a couple of mistakes as it goes on, or he dips as the season goes on. And I think Verstappen will get stronger as the season goes on. So I'm going to say Verstappen in second, and just the same as you, Perez in fourth, a very solid fourth, more points than he got last year, with a couple of wins in there as well. And of course, Red Bull to come second.
I think there can be no argument about that whatsoever. I think they were comfortably ahead, unless Aston Martin produced something incredible, which I would love to see. No, there's nobody that can challenge Red Bull's position in second as it stands.
Well, that is the end of our Red Bull launch podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. We will be back later on this week for the Ferrari team launch, whatever that means. For some reason, they're doing their launch in 2 parts, but we will, of course, be here to discuss it. Chris, thank you so much for joining us once again, and we'll see you all later on in the week.
See you for Ferrari.